We have about a half hour of Q&A, and I think the best way to maybe handle the Q&A is if participants will post their questions in the chat. And while everyone is writing their questions in the chat, I thought maybe I would start with a question for the panel. Listening to all of these really informative presentations, I was thinking that many of the presentations kind of focused on issues of terms and categories. So my question is about terms and categories. Terms and categories in terms of law, in terms of getting justice, legal justice for caste-based discrimination and caste violence, and also the terms and categories that are used to build solidarities. So it occurred to me that, for a system that affects so many millions of people in the world, there is actually no clear term that is used to kind of make the experiences, as Dr. Fulmar was saying, the all-encompassing horrendous experiences of caste legible in international law or national law. There's these different categories that are used, whether it's, the terms of the Civil Rights Act and in employment law, whether it's the terms of race, whether it's the terms of work and dissent. There's no clear category that is used to make legible the experiences of caste discrimination. And I think, so I guess my one question is, I guess my question is, why can't there be international laws against caste-based discrimination? I guess, can we think about, like, why is it that that activists and scholars are kind of forced to use these categories that were created by others? Categories that are useful, like categories of discrimination based on dissent and work, but there's still categories that don't fully encompass the experience of caste. And my other question, kind of related to the talk that Dr. Yenbe gets, is the category used to build social solidarity, to build solidarities for social justice. The terms used and the categories used in different are all local categories, whether it's race in the United States, whether it's terms related to the Barackman in Japan or the Roma in Europe. And so that was another question I had about how can we, as Dr. Yenbe suggested, extend our thinking of kind of social marginality to build solidarity. So those are kind of my opening questions, and then I'll look through the chat and pose the group the other questions that come up.
So can I take a shot at this first? Because certainly what Suraj was saying, and it's part of what we've been talking about and writing about in our book. If you look at the African American experience from about 1830 to really about 1915, 1910, our way of talking about our issues was based in caste. And as long as we're talking about caste, there's a natural analogy between our struggle and the Dalit struggle. And that kind of analogy was being made. But as we move into the beginning of the 20th century, we start now to start talking about our struggle in global terms, in terms of race. And it's the move from thinking of our struggle in terms of caste to our struggle in terms of race that now completely changes who becomes our allies. Our allies now then become people who are fighting white supremacy and not people who are fighting oppression. So as we make this turn around 1910, 1920, we now then find ourselves aligning ourselves with the Indian independence movement and with mostly upper caste Hindus who dominate the Indian independence movement, because after all, the thought is that we're fighting against race, not caste. And therefore, this sort of responds to Paul's question, because Martin Luther King Jr. then comes at the tail end of this period of where we've been thinking about ourselves internationally as a global struggle against white supremacy. And therefore, to embrace the Indian independence movement and to embrace Gandhi is to embrace our allies who are fighting white supremacy. But what we, the African American community, I think have found out now is that that struggle based on race only worked through the colonial period. As these countries in Asia and Africa then become independent, they really don't have the same place for us because they're now working and running their own governments. And that's much more a national issue than trying to internationally connect with us as allies. Whereas a focus on caste for us as African American would create a much more stable group of allies than what we had when we focused on race. So that was my thoughts.
I guess the question was also directed at me, Purvi, or is anybody else? Did you mention in the first? They can go and I can go at the last. It's okay with me.
I think it was addressed to all of the panelists. So whoever would like to speak.
Okay, I think since in the spirits of muteness, I will unmute. I think to take the point from Professor Brown, I think it's see, I think what we need to do is we need to be more creative in our categories. Now, what Paul, for example, is doing is trying to work through the limited avenues that he has been given by the bureaucratic arrangements, and through that, you know, since there are established, the race became global phenomenon, I think probably because of two people. One is Martin Luther King Jr. and second is Nelson Mandela. And this became, you know, a very global kind of thought to kind of fight. And also because the apartheid regime remained until our memories, it's only gone now. So that struggle in our imagination was this parallel struggle of people fighting against racism, and it worked out well. But don't get me wrong, race was not meant to be discussed in the United Nations. We know Jan Smuts of the South Africa was pushing back whenever race was used. He would talk about the Dalit problem in India. That's why Du Bois and his team, when they went to San Francisco, that's when Ambedkar reached out to them, because they wanted to make United Nations aware of their problem. And eventually, then we see the most important moment of American civil rights, I think, which never happened, was Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X coming together to go to the United Nations and fight for the color-based, you know, their own what they call racialized system. Now, if we have to connect with the other people who are similarly oppressed, who don't operate under this recent phenomena of race, is to, you know, extend or loosen our rigidity of understanding how race is constituted and how it is performed. It is very difficult for us if we just play with that. And the people responsible for this are the two kind of people, I think. One are the communists, who in their post-colonial politics of third world, or calling themselves as post-colonials, they themselves were elites. Although revolutionary and radicals fighting against capitalist regime, they promoted a very dwarfing idea of racial/capitalism into that, or racial-capitalism. And the second type of people were liberals, who then, you know, found out inadequate tools for them to understand. And liberals, as you know, would not do much effort. Whatever there is, like for example, justice for Breonna Taylor, okay, let me just get on that hashtag and work through that. They wouldn't go and investigate the much problem. And this happened because the post-colonial elites of each societies, for example, don't get me wrong, the African elites are more in Harvard than the African American population. There is a certain relation of superiority. Nelson Mandela himself was a son of a prince. We can't discount these facts when we also highlight Gandhi's background as coming from the Prime Minister of Porbandar region. The reason it becomes important is that the people who then took on fight against a mythical structure of racial politics of a white supremacy, what they did was to essentialize experiences. And this happened with the Dalits as well. Now today, I categorized the Dalit Brahmin, the global Dalits and global Brahmins. And I put global Dalits up and global Brahmins down simply because we need to subvert that attention. We know the Brahmin as a concept was prevalent in the colonial societies. You know, Boston Brahmin is a very famous term that was applied to the elites of society, the indisputable Boston Brahmins. Similarly, we have Brahmins across society. It's just that they didn't identify. So the Dalit experience need to be then, conveyed. And I think what Paul, for example, is doing with our friends who are fighting against the slavery in Mauritania or other parts, I think there is a huge scope, especially in Latin America too, because they very recently adopted the concept of race. Before race, they had their own, the Spanish terms, as we know, caste, castas. Castas is a Portuguese term, and the Latin American context always had this. The Brazilian framing was always surrounded this. The plantation economy was always surrounding this. But because of, I think, lack of tools. So I think what I'm trying to do is, or I think I'm at least trying to propose is to, for example, adopt new tools and experiment with this. We don't have to adopt it immediately, but if we go with this and see how a Dalitness would perform, because Dalitness is basically three things: the inheritance, you are born with the stigma, with the categorization. Second, you live with it and you try to negotiate your identity. And third, you are permanently displaced. If we are able to attach this, because your caste is given through your mother's womb, and mother's womb, the genderized aspect is central, and this is everywhere. So I think we need a new theory, and maybe in my next article that I'm writing on global caste, I'll try to present this for more solidarities.
Great, thank you. So right now I'm seeing 3 questions in the chat. The first one is from Dominique from Mauritius. Would you like to? I can read it, or would you like to ask your question? Okay, I'll read it. This is from Dominique from Mauritius. I'm a social sciences consultant and human rights activist. What if our own vocabulary is rectified? For example, there were slaves during slavery, but there were humans who were enslaved. Dalits, same. Humans who are culturally discriminated. Why not insist that we are human first and make sure that in every country, the human rights institution has a power as a parallel civil rights government? That's a really good question about about having a parallel institution to enforce and oversee human rights in every kind of different national context.
Rather than separating and between us ourselves, because in Mauritius actually we're Native African who are not recognized in our constitution. So I'm not fighting only for Native African, I'm fighting for everyone, for human rights. So why not doing this? That's why my question. If we can.
I'll take a stab at this, because if I think of what I'm trying to do as an African American, is I'm trying to fight on a local level with the problems that African Americans are having in the United States. And then I'm trying to fight on a global level to create really an alliance of people who have been suffering some form of oppression. But that means that I'm fighting on 2 different levels. So when I'm fighting on this local level, when I'm fighting on this level in the United States, for the United States, international law doesn't mean much. The United States believes that it's US law that matters, that if our Congress enters into treaties, those treaties don't become US law unless Congress enacts specific US legal categories. So for the African American struggle on its local level, the international level doesn't help us. And in the categories I have to use are the categories that will make people move here, and that is race, right? In America, caste doesn't really move the legal system, race does. So you've got to make the argument in terms of race. But I agree with you if we're stepping back and looking at it on an international level. And indeed, one of the things I think Suraj and I think, and even Paul, I think, are agreeing on is that the language of race does in fact limit your allies. And indeed, in some ways, may not even pick up your most important allies, because you can have dominant Blacks in the various countries in Africa who are oppressing other Blacks. But within a race framework, we as African Americans are oblivious to that, or systematically that is obscured from us. So I would agree with you on an international level, but we're also fighting a struggle on a local level that will require us to use the local terminology.
I have just a few words to add that I think are consistent with Kevin's remarks, but also consistent with yours, Dominique. As I've been listening to the discourse that we've had around labels, et cetera, I was struck with your term, Dominique, about parallelism. So I think that one of the problems with trying to discuss how caste and race, or caste and religion, or whatever systems of discrimination that we have are either like or unlike each other, or are the same as one another. It occurs to me that we need to develop a vocabulary around how we are making comparisons as well. So I've fought in several academic conferences against the idea that caste is class, against the idea that caste is race. But at the same time, I think it's very important to recognize the parallels between them, how different systems of logic apply similarly to these different forms of social structure that are put in place largely so that some people can have power over other people. So I think it's important to keep in mind Kevin's remarks that, you know, we need the language of race in the United States because it is able to mobilize us politically. But the language of race, in my view, in Nepal is often employed to try to downgrade the importance of caste rather than really to deal with the question of race there. So I think it's really important for us to recognize that the way that we convey these things is often a rather subtle conversation rather than the use of labels, because we generally have to kind of pick the labels apart to show how labels are similar and different in different cultural contexts.
Purvi, can I go? Yeah, thank you very much. I think there are 2-3 parallel streams we are looking at, and I think I agree with Kevin, saying that there are certain tactics, strategies we need to have at the domestic level. Like, for example, in India, we already have 2-3 major, constitutional provisions as well as legislative mechanisms. Likewise, I think Nepal has very clearly, and I think Pakistan to a certain extent has, but Sri Lanka is just emerging, Bangladesh is still not. So I think in the Asian context, we need to look at it both domestically as well as in the region. And similarly, Mauritania probably is the only country, my African friends should correct me if I'm wrong, that they have abolished the so-called slavery, because their slavery and the so-called caste structure, which is now discrimination based on work and descent in that term, is the one which they're used. And then they will have certain specific terminology and then need to wrestle with the definitions in order to ensure that they have access to justice. And definitely, I think US will have its own mechanisms. Like Meena was saying, in UK, you have certain ways in which equality law, they're trying to bring in the whole aspect of caste in. But where I'm coming from is, we need to crack the ceiling at the UN. And I know Suraj is saying that it's a very narrow thing, and definitely it is narrow because you cannot deal in UN with a very broad academic definitions. Maybe it'll evolve after maybe 50, 60 years. But today, we already have very clear instruments which have been have come after a lot of struggle, you know, the struggle at the World Conference and several other things, and then the kind of interventions that are being made, the visibility of these whole things, which is very distinct. And I thank Steve for making this distinction. In some countries, even though caste and race have so many similarities, the implementation, when it comes to the implementation, like for example, both in India, Nepal, and several other countries, it primarily pertains to certain aspects of or certain categories of indigenous communities only, or ethnicity, which they call it, you know, they call it ethnicity, racial minorities. Unfortunately, for a long time, even the UN has put the Dalit agenda in the whole of the indigenous, then they shifted to minorities, and then now it is nowhere. And it is beginning to emerge as a constituency of DWD. I think we are on the verge of pushing the UN for recognizing a constituency called stakeholders putting on the issue of discrimination based on work and descent group. So among the human rights organizations, the civil society organizations, which is around 11 to 12 categories of youth, race, indigenous, women, you know, this is going to be one, and I think that will be one of the first formal breakthroughs that we would have had. So in the major groups and other stakeholders, we might have one group. But then I think we need to ensure that there are small steps that are made so that eventually we too will have a declaration which is similar to what have, I mean, racial, you know, they have already a convention, international convention, probably the one of the first to have been done. And Suraj, I think there are certain facts that you'll have to be. It has come way before Nelson Mandela. It has nothing to do with Nelson Mandela, but much before Nelson Mandela. Definitely, Du Bois had made a strong intervention there to make this particular convention come true. But we need a declaration very specifically, which recognizes the communities as discriminated based on work and this, and maybe we'll have to fight for a better definition, better word, a category, but which will ring and band us together as one community, so that like how the indigenous have made, what is common between Maori and people of First Nation and Sami and several others across the world? Very little, but they have bound themselves together. And today you cannot have an agenda in the UN without the indigenous on the table. And their population is really not as much. So I think academic discourse, definitely, I think we'll have to progress, we'll have to deconstruct, we'll have to ensure that this is there, but ensure that legally at the UN, we have certain terminology which can then transfer into mechanisms where we can force the states to adopt. There are at least 21 states today in the countries who do not have any protective measures. What are we doing about it? And in all these countries, like for example, even in India, you have measures, but the implementation is not there. And the UN does not have a kind of oversight over this. Whereas in other cases, it has certain oversight. Not that in the present government, the oversight is making any difference and they're making a mockery of the constitutional provisions, but that's a different thing. So there, where I would humbly, you know, kind of differ with Suraj is, while you develop the so-called academic discourse, do not forget the constitutional, the legal definitions, which I think Kevin has very clearly pointed, which matters both at the domestic, and Steve has said that, you know, we need to ensure these terminologies at the UN, which will then trickle down as very clear mechanisms which can have laws and you know, mechanisms for budgets, for example, oversights, for example, you know, these need to be done. Sorry for being long-winded. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Devakar. I know Suraj, you wanted to respond a little bit.
Yeah, I think, Paul, I'm with you on that. What I was trying to say is you have a very limited avenue, and yet you are trying to find ways through that, which is basically the work of some of the academics here to kind of help that work. Is to, because within the as we know, the history of UN has been very complicated when it comes to the question of caste and Dalits, and I mean, you guys know the IDSN has been constantly rejected. Even other organizations who are trying to get ECOSOC has been pushed into a different corner. And so what I applaud is wherever you are finding a space to create more motion, there you are. But what I'm talking about is on a policy level, some of these things, especially by academic as well as in other non-policy makers, need to push to the UN to be more accountable. Right now, what we have is we have DWD mechanism, which will work for us, and hopefully that will continue to what happened. I don't need to preach the choir here, who have been in the Durban negotiations and how it was manipulated by the government. But here the responsibility rests upon the people who are civil society organizations as to how then we take into account these definitions. And I definitely don't mean to say race became popularized in everyday people because of the struggle that was brought through the adoption of liberal space of Martin Luther King Jr. as well as Nelson Mandela as the heroes that it was become. And of course in India everybody talked about race because Nelson Mandela was this famous freedom fighter who was lost. One final point I'll just say, I think is a clarity, is I am not arguing for negation of race terminology, and neither am I proposing that the experiences of racialized citizens, subjects, need to be undermined. What I am, however, arguing is when we look at the history of formation of certain groups, race then has to be loosened. The definition need not be looked through the biologism, because right now race is still looked through the biologism of how we attribute each other. And that's where Du Bois and Ambedkar said this is not the correct way of looking at it. And so race might be relevant in America, relevant in some of the countries where still white supremacist tendencies operate. But then that doesn't necessarily confirm the biases in other countries which have been carriers of certain supremacist values which were not necessarily white. That's all I'm saying. And I think Professor Brown has put it very rightfully. The local as well as global kind of understanding of this has done. I think Isabel Wilkerson has done an excellent job to that effect, to argue about how race then is about the kind of caste based system.
Great, thank you so much. Oh, did you want to respond to that, Dominique?
Yeah, I wanted to complete my thoughts. While you were all talking, something just clicked, and I say, why not trying to say this? Well, what the Dalit has in common with Mauritius is that actually the Hindu is oppressing other communities, right? In America, the Afro-American are being oppressed by by the white supremacy. So we have still the same common thing. But the thing is that in Mauritius and even in India, the Dalit, we are not recognized in our constitution. But it is not a crime for the UN not to recognize people. I don't know if you get my point, meaning that, let's say Mauritius is in Indian Ocean, right? We do have fishes, different type of fish. So we say we have sharks, we have shrimps, everything is marked, but not on our land. So what if it is a crime not to recognize a race or a culture or something, but it is not mentioned anyway? It just clicked because we're not recognized, that's the point. So if Mauritius is not recognizing an ethnicity, it shall be a crime. So maybe something like that can go to the UN. I don't know, thinking.
Great, thank you so much. We have only about 5 minutes left of the Q&A. And I think what I'll do, I'll just read the two next questions that came because they're related. And then, yeah, we probably won't have time for another question, but okay. So the next question was from Prince Singh. And this was Shri Paul's dismemberment is spot on and now a global political strategy. How can this global Dalit Black movement help the globe name this virus and heal from this global sickness? The next question is from Rick Gold. Both caste and race discrimination, regardless of their interaction, are systemic. How can this understanding guide strategy and tactics for fighting them? Does anyone want to jump in? Paul?
I use the word dismemberment. I think when I look at the tremendous role, you know, it's just a fantastic attempt, and very subtly played by Baba Saheb Ambedkar. You know, at his time, and I remember even when I was young, the kind of identities that we are called by. I'm sorry, this is primarily in the Indian context, but hopefully it'll also can be parallelly used in the other places. I have never imagined that I will be linking with the Dalits from, say, for example, Bihar. I mean, we never even imagined, you know, we thought, okay, the Dalits only in a few parts of Andhra Pradesh, not even in the whole of Andhra Pradesh. Because the power of Brahminical casteism, which has perpetrated till now, is primarily because they have kept it dismembered. And as I was saying earlier, 600,000 villages have a microcosm of this segregated living in each. So even though as one group, we are probably the largest group in India. In India alone, we are around 201 million in 2011. Probably now, I think we'll at least be, officially we'll be much, maybe 240, 250. And this does not include, unfortunately, the Muslim Dalits. It does not include the Christian Dalits, and it does not include even the Buddhist Dalits, because even now in Maharashtra, Buddhist Dalits are not counted as Dalits, scheduled caste, very technical thing. Now, what Ambedkar has done is he connected with these communities, and probably I do not know. There must be certain people. I think there are certain people who have brought in certain indicators of how this exclusion works, and they have connected under the castes and tribes of India, and then documented these groups and said that, with these parameters, these are the communities which can be defined as so-called scheduled caste communities. Now, with that one stroke, which Ambedkar earlier used the depressed classes, and later the whole, asserted word that has been used as Dalits, now has united 230 or whatever, about 200 million people in the country. I'm a Madiga from Andhra Pradesh, and today I'm connected with several of these communities across the country. There are they say about at least 4,000 different categories, names of Dalits. I know the skin color is very different. Kevin was talking about skin color, and I'm thinking, I can only think of two people, me coming from the south, dark complexion, and you have somebody like Thorat, who is more fairer than many Brahmins, in India. But still, we are connected as one caste. And I think that bringing together has made a host of a difference, a radical shift from India to any other country, including Burakumin. The Japanese had a different strategy. They actually tried to inculcate, and then in some ways, in a way, not totally assert, because they felt it is too much of a weightage of further being discriminated. So they would rather have their visibility not very high. But on the other hand, Ambedkar's strategy was different, not only visibilizing who the Dalits are, but connecting them together across in the country. And I think he has also attempted to do the globalization of Dalits in his time. So I think there is a need for us to connect together. And there, I think, somebody was saying, we have races within caste, and we need to link together those who have been excluded within the race, within the gender, within the indigeneity. I think somewhere there are overlaps. In some places the same persons are regarded as tribes. In some places probably they're regarded as the DWD communities. It doesn't really matter. We may have overlaps, but this kind of connecting us back and making sure that we have a strong force to be able, we don't have to be exactly the same, but our voice for demanding certain common frameworks and common ensuring principles which will push the demand for equity, demand for access to justice, and demand for real justice rather than the de jure justice that is existing. I think that will really ensure that this will be completely be able. I think that completely remembering ourselves and then bringing us as one strap handle is very, very critical to our movement.
Great, thank you so much. And I'm so sorry, but we've run out of time, so I won't be able to get to the rest of the questions, which are all really wonderful questions. But I want to thank the panelists again for their really thought-provoking presentations. I believe we have a 10-minute break now. And yeah, I look forward to the rest of the panels, and I also look forward to continuing the conversations that we started with this last panel in the future. So thank you again.
Excellent moderation, Purvi. Thank you so much to you.
Thank you, Purvi. Fantastic.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Hi, Mina. I was live.
Purvi is one of our very resilient, the leaders we do have at the ICDR International. And we are very much proud of her contribution and leadership. And thank you, everyone, for your great presentation, in-depth presentation. I think it would drive towards the new directions to build our collaboration. Let's take a break and we'll come back again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sagar. Really putting us all together. Great,
Yep.
great. Thank you very much for giving us the spaces.
Our song. I want every sister and brother to sing like they never sang before. The old satchel. Let's go.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us only sky. Imagine all the people sharing no countries. Isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for. No
Okay, welcome back. Let's start our next session. As we had discussed this morning about the combating racism and casteism, and then collaboration, looking into the social disparities and identifying the new tools to globalize and galvanize the Dalit rights movement or racial justice movement. In the meantime, while we are discussing these issues, we have seen and received the various painful news and information from around the globe. Just this week, there was a 12-year girl from Nepal. She was raped and killed. There was a tailor who was killed. And there were a number of massacres in India, particularly the different state within the India. So these, and then other part of the South Asia and around the globe. As Paul mentioned, the various, this location around the globe and the society and the communities. So every day and each moment, Dalit or racial minorities or underprivileged community have been facing a challenge, a threatening. And this is something we have to look into and bring the government and society into account. So our next session would be when we are talking about the collaboration, combating, eliminating injustice and the discrimination, and collaboration for the promotion of justice system. So we need to identify what level of justice system, there are the numbers of justice system, social justice system, economic justice system, climate, environment justice system, criminal justice systems, and each of these has to be ratified, reformed, and promoted in the favor of the representative communities or the people who have been facing a racial injustice or caste, work, and descent-based discrimination. So moving forward, we would like to discuss on that in our next panel, and we would like to introduce our very dynamic leaders, the chair of the International Commission for Dalit Rights, Richard Gold. So as I said, he is our leader. He is a chairman of the International Commission for Dalit Rights. He is a legislative and the rule of law expert. He has served as a head of the rule of law division within the Department of Democracy and Governance in the United States Agency for International Development, USAID. Richard is an international development and rule of law consultant right now within an expertise in the human rights and gender promoting. Now he has been providing a technical leadership for the human rights, anti-corruption, and rule of law programs. He oversaw a human rights program in Colombia that targeted indigenous and Afro-African groups, Afro-Colombian groups in zones of conflict. He also managed the anti-corruption program in Bangladesh and built a capacity of civil society and the media, the parliament, and the inspector general to increase the transparency and fight corruption, a veteran of the U.S. Agency for the International Development, Foreign Service, within the 29 and now 30 years of experience. Mr. Gold vastly expanded the agency's human rights activities in Egypt and helped the Moroccan civil society put in the place the most advanced family code of all Muslim majority countries. He headed the rule of law division in the agency headquarters, Democracy and Governance Office. For several years, he directed USAID Egypt Democracy Office, where he planned, procured, and oversaw the Human Rights, Democracy, and Governance Program. Mr. Gold hold a master's degree of Public Affairs from the Howard University Kennedy School of Government, as well as a Master of Public and International Affairs degree from the University of Pittsburgh. Without further ado, Rick Gold, you have the platform to moderate the next session, chair and moderate the next session.
So much, TB. It's great to talk with all of you, and I'm honored to be a part of this conference and panel. This panel will be focusing on a reformation of justice systems, particularly dealing with caste and race. And we're going to have 4 speakers today. We have Dr. Waris Hussain, who'll be talking about the status of Dalit justice in South Asia. Manjula Pradeep, who are talking about challenges and strategies to address gender and caste in justice systems. Kenya Tyson, who will be talking about race and criminal justice systems in the US. And Vincent Manoharan, who will be talking about caste and religion. So before we go ahead, I wanted to provide some points that I think are very important in this area. First of all, modern justice systems in South Asia grew out of religious systems and colonial systems, both of which formalized caste discrimination. While justice systems, for more or less, no longer formalized caste discrimination, such discrimination continues to occur at every point in the process, from police to lawyers to courts to prisons, as well as to informal justice systems. In the US, the justice system formalized race discrimination from the moment the first Black slaves were brought to the country in 1619. And while racial discrimination is no longer enshrined in US law to more or less, racism pervades the justice system the same way that caste discrimination does in South Asia. There are various definitions of racial discrimination and caste discrimination, but they are both systemic abuses of human rights. It's therefore important to identify the challenges of racism and casteism to our justice systems. And only by identifying these challenges can civil society activists, researchers, and political leaders guide the reforms needed to make justice systems serve the needs of both the state and the people. Each country has its own unique path towards rule of law, and justice reform efforts must be adapted to the specific country environment. However, participants at this conference can elucidate some basic principles for addressing racism and casteism in the justice systems, as well as lessons learned. Finally, our speakers on this panel will provide an unusual breadth of expertise to help us develop strategies for fighting casteism and racism in our justice systems. And with that, I'd like to introduce some of our speakers. Okay. First, Dr. Waris Hussain, who will be addressing the status of Dalit justice in South Asia. Dr. Hussain is the Senior Staff Attorney for South and Southeast Asia with the ABA Justice Defenders Program. Prior to joining the center, Dr. Hussain was a policy analyst at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, covering the South Asia region. He's an adjunct professor of international law at the Howard University School of Law. Dr. Hussain received his SJD degree from American University, Washington College of Law in 2017, specializing in constitutional and comparative law. His dissertation focused on the development of judicial review in the Supreme Courts of Pakistan, India, and the United States, which was published by Routledge South Asia in 2017. He received his JD from the Howard University School of Law in 2011 and his LLM at American University, Washington College of Law, specializing in international human rights and international business in 2013. Dr. Hussain?
Thanks, Rick. Can you hear me okay? Can you see me okay? Yes. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much to the ICDR. Thank you, Rick and DB. I know that you all had intended to do this in person, this conference, and we're in virtual land now because of the plague that we're all experiencing as human nature. And I'm super glad and thankful to you all to continue this effort because I know it's not easy to shift to a virtual format. As DB was mentioning in the introduction, I mean, we've had several atrocities committed against Dalits around South Asia in the last week, and it's a continuation of many incidences that have happened for centuries. In addition, as we're here in the United States, you know, we're mourning the loss of Breonna Taylor. We're mourning the loss of justice in this country, the United States, for racial justice, for equality, for the treatment by the government for all people in the same way. And I know, Rick, you mentioned that our laws don't necessarily include discrimination anymore, but clearly the execution, the enforcement of laws, right, through the courts and through the justice system is demonstrably and continually, you know, attacking and taking away the dignity, the human rights, and the right to life for Black Americans in the United States. That has to be said. And I want to take a second, just a couple moments of silence for the memory of Breonna Taylor and the injustice that's happening with her family, with the fact that the individuals who killed her in her home as she was sleeping have not been brought to justice and may not be brought to justice. So I'm going to take a few seconds and just pause to let that set in. Because her name has to be said and justice has to be provided. And I think one of the things that we all need to know about from across the world, whether we're looking at Black or Dalit liberation movements, you know, the movement is for the recognition by the law, by the recognition of courts, by the recognition of judges, by the recognition of lawyers, of the equality of all people. And it seems like a basic thing to say, but in fact, as we see in South Asia and as we see in America, that's not as easily, you know, brought forth because we have discrimination within the legal sector itself. So that brings me sort of to the actual sort of work that I'm doing right now at the Justice Defenders Program at the American Bar Association, as Rick mentioned. The Justice Defenders Program is meant to provide legal assistance to justice defender communities around the world. And so one of the things that I found in my work in South Asia has been continually that the Dalit community is not provided justice, is not provided access to justice, and is oftentimes not represented in the justice sector and system itself, whether it's through police, whether it's through judges, or whether it's through lawyers. We don't have a proper representation of the Dalit community in the justice sector itself. And what does that mean, right? And what does that implicate? What it means is that when you have a Dalit atrocity happen, and it goes in front of a judge that's not from the community, and it's handled by lawyers who are not from the community, and it's investigated by police who are not from the community, they won't understand the underlying concepts and the underlying feelings of discrimination that happen for this community because that community has been excluded from the enforcement right, of law, and from the practice of law. And so what I decided to do was about a year ago in partnership with ICDR, and I want to mention that it was in partnership with ICDR because they helped me so much. But what we decided to do was look specifically, not just at Dalit rights overall, but look at the justice sector, right? Lawyers, judges, that whole sort of scene in South Asia, in Bangladesh, in Nepal, in India, and in Pakistan, and to find writers from the community, right? Lawyers who were Dalits themselves, who could go out into the field and do the first of its kind of a survey, right? To talk to other justice defenders from the Dalit community and ask them, what's the kind of discrimination you face as a lawyer? Not just as a Dalit, but as a Dalit lawyer. And what we found, and what we're going to be publishing soon, is a full report on that regional context that we did with surveys in each one of the countries. The findings for each country were different. I mean, I think they were varied between India, between Nepal, between Pakistan, between Bangladesh. You have different competing interests, I think, happening, right? And competing administrations of justice that have existed for a long period of time. So what we found in Pakistan and Bangladesh, for example, as Muslim majority countries where Hindus are a very small minority, there is not only discrimination of Dalits as Dalits amongst their own community, but also as Hindus, right? Or as members of a minority religious sect in Pakistan and Bangladesh. So we had even less sort of a representation in the legal community, whether it was lawyers or judges from the Dalit community, because not only are they sort of in a minority, but they're in a minority of a minority, right? So Hindus are themselves a minority in these two countries, in Bangladesh and Pakistan, and Dalits are then a minority within that. So, you know, to break through those many levels or those many glass ceilings, and in some instances, they're not glass ceilings, they're iron ceilings that can't be broken through. What we found is that there weren't many lawyers that were representing or that were from the community that were in the justice system. That was definitely the fact for Pakistan, where the most of our study looked into the province of Sindh, which is where the most of the Hindu population in Pakistan lives. And we found that, you know, there was a very, very low representation of judges and of lawyers from the Dalit community. And the ones that did practice said that they faced discrimination, not only from, you know, the majority of the Muslim lawyers or the non-Hindu lawyers, but also from the Hindu sort of lawyers themselves. So there was inter-religious discrimination and intra-religious discrimination happening within the legal field. Now, what does that like translate to? I think one of the things that many of us as lawyers probably know in the room is that, or maybe in South Asia at least, is that a bar council chamber, right? The place where there's a hangout spot, essentially, for lawyers in a court that exists in almost every court in South Asia, whether you're looking at Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh, whatever, right? So it's where lawyers hang out, they have, you know, their snacks, they have coffee, they smoke, it's a sort of place where they network, right? In those instances, Dalits were not, or lawyers who were from the Dalit community were not allowed to enter the bar council chambers. So where there's all this palling around happening, where there's business being exchanged, where there's clients' information, or at least clients' issues being discussed, where there's a sharpening of skills of lawyers within the room because there's other lawyers that are helping mentor them, the Dalit community is excluded from all of that. So not only are they have a small representation in the justice sector itself as lawyers, but they also don't have mentors and don't have people from outside their community that are willing to bring them up, to uplift their voices. So that's one of the things that we found in the case of Pakistan. For India, it was multifaceted. What we found was that there was many instances of discrimination that were happening from the bench itself, right? So that judges wouldn't necessarily grant justice to a Dalit lawyer if that's the person who's before their court, versus any other lawyer from any other sort of background, right? So it actually has an impact. And I'm not just saying that representation is important because we have to empower the Dalit community. I think that there are issues that the courts hear, like atrocities committed against Dalits, like rapes, like murders, like hate crimes that are committed against this community. And when you don't have a lawyer or a judge in the room from that community, you're always going to have a missing link. You're never going to be able to fully deliver justice, I think. And that's why representation not only impacts the community's empowerment, it impacts their access to justice itself. Their ability to seek and gain justice from their systems is impacted by the fact that they aren't represented in those fields, right? For Nepal, we also found the similar instances happening. We have 6.5 million Dalits in Nepal. We have a constitution that's supposed to grant equality and prohibit discrimination, but what we found was that for many lawyers who were practicing the field, there was a great deal of discrimination that they faced, whether it was through these bar council chambers, whether it was through the lack of access to the network for other lawyers, or whether there's a lack of access to mentoring. So that lays out, I think, some of the issues that are present. So then, of course, complaining about how bad things are without providing a solution is not something that I'm happy doing. So we're thinking through now with this report on what recommendations can be made. And many of the recommendations actually we found are actually going to be made towards the bar councils themselves. We have a lack of reporting, we have a lack of representation, we have a lack of sort of coverage or mentorship or any kind of sort of means to alleviate the discrimination that the lawyers face. And a lot of that has to come from the bar councils themselves. They have to take action to try and prevent discrimination. There's also concepts that we have in the United States of affinity groups, right? So there's a South Asian Bar Association in DC, for example. There's a Black Public Defender Bar Association. There's different bar associations for different affinity groups. And so maybe partnering up at some point with Dalits on the ground in these countries with US organizations, these affinity type groups, and to try and collaborate and create partnerships and to create dialogues on how do you create a Dalit bar council, right? How do we create something that we can empower our own community with? And then the second thing I'll mention is that collaboration with HBCUs in the United States. I teach at Howard University, which I'm very proud to be a graduate of Howard, and I teach at Howard University because one of our founding sort of fathers of our justice approach was Charles Hamilton Houston, who once said that as a lawyer, you can either be a social parasite or you can be a social engineer. You only have two options. And for Howard, you're going to be a social engineer, meaning you have to try and improve not only the world you live in, but the world for everyone else. So I think that approach is also important for Dalit and Black liberation cooperation in the future. And that's something that has to happen as well. Law schools that are HBCUs, like Thurgood Marshall Law School or the Howard University Law School, can help to foster sort of links and try and create solidarity between these movements. I know that Professor Brown, I believe, is here. I know he presented earlier today, but he's going to be working with me to create a program to work on this solidarity issue. And that's one of the things that we're looking at to try and do global approach. And then for domestic approach, the report will recommend to the governments and to bar councils and to the human rights commissions of each one of these countries the findings we had in the report, and then recommend that they take action, whether it's through implementation, whether it's through empowerment of the community by having reserved seats at law schools, at bar councils, at law firms themselves. That's something that we need to focus on, and that's something we need to, I think, encourage in order to deal with this issue, both of lack of representation in the justice field, but also how that lack of representation by this community impacts their access to justice as a community. And that's where I'll leave it, and I'll pass it back to Rick, if it's okay with you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for sharing the work that we're doing together in studying the Dalit rights defenders, legal defenders in South Asia. So our next speaker is Manjula Pradeep, and she's going to address challenges and strategies to address gender and caste injustice system. Manjula Pradeep has been a Dalit rights activist for more than 2.5 decades in India. She's the director of campaigns for the Dalit Human Rights Defenders Network. Ms. Pradeep is the founder of WAVE, the Wise Act of Youth Visioning and Engagement Foundation. She's the former executive director of the Nafsarjan Trust of Gujarat, a grassroots human rights organization dedicated to eliminating caste discrimination. Ms. Pradeep has served on the board of the International Dalit Solidarity Network and has advocated on caste and gender issues at the United Nations and the European Parliament. Manjula, go ahead. You should unmute yourself, Manjula.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Jabin friends, many thanks to DB and ICDR friends for inviting me to share my thoughts and views on challenges and strategies to address the gender and caste and justice system. And it was a great opportunity to listen to the views and thoughts of my previous panelists and in my current panelist, Mr. Waris Hussain. Movement to end caste-based discrimination has come a long way, but the movement to end gender and caste still has a long way to go, as we are thinking, shaping, and building the lives of women and girls who face challenges of being born with a particular caste and gender. Leadership of Dalit women have emerged more strongly in the 90s. I'm talking in the context of India and Nepal. And it emerged when they took decisions to lead the process of setting up their own organizations, networks, and platforms. This was more prominent in Nepal and India, and slowly Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka followed. But we still have a long way to go. I would like to first focus on the challenges which are there while addressing the caste and gender injustice system. Justice for me is not just through the use of legal mechanisms, but justice is more where the most marginalized person in the context of South Asia and the caste African countries, a Dalit woman, gets a right to social, economic, and political justice. So I would like to now put points with regard to the challenges. The first challenge which a Dalit woman or a Dalit girl faces is of her own identity, because they are vulnerably positioned at the bottom of caste, class, and gender hierarchies. They experience endemic gender and caste discrimination and violence, which is the outcome of severely imbalanced social, economic, and political power equations. Their socioeconomic vulnerability and lack of political voice, when combined with the dominant risk factors of being Dalit and female, increase their exposure to potentially violent situations while simultaneously reducing their ability to escape. Gender-based inequalities, shaped and intensified by the caste system, leads to violence, which serves as a crucial social mechanism to maintain Dalit women's subordinate position in society, which further denies those opportunities, choices, and freedoms at multiple levels, undermining not only their dignity and self-respect, but also their right to development. I think the major challenge is silence when it comes to violence against Dalit women and girls. Incidences of violence which are not spoken out in public by the women themselves, or not reported in the media, or not registered by law enforcement authorities, or hidden by the Dalit women's families, relatives, and communities, or suppressed by the dictate of the perpetrators and or the perpetrators' caste communities. The effect is the creation and maintenance of a culture of violence, silence, and impunity. The presence of laws, however, would competent implementation to ensure personal security to Dalit women, and without concerted efforts to emancipate the Dalit community and eradicate entrenched gender and caste bias notions of inequality and injustice is not enough. These challenges have put the lives of Dalit women and girls in a vicious cycle which goes from generations to generations, and we don't see a significant change in their lives. And as I was listening to DB's voice about a Dalit girl was raped, I think there are several cases which we are handling and we are dealing with in our day-to-day lives. And I just don't have the time to express those concerns or those cases, but I just put the challenges. Now, I think I want to spend more time on strategies, which is very crucial to address the caste and gender injustice system. I think an analysis of caste, class, gender dynamics is imperative. It is only by adopting this threefold lens, focusing on the cultural and material dimensions of the intersection of gender and caste discrimination, that the true comprehension of key social relations and social inequalities will come out. And intersectional, I think that point was also raised by Renu and also by other panelists before me. An intersectional caste, class, gender analysis also fulfills the need to make Dalit women visible to the public eye through exposing the reality of violence and disempowerment intrinsically related to their social position in recognition of their selfhood and human dignity. Analyzing the social relations which convert difference into systemic oppression and violence enables not only policymakers, but also women's movement and Dalit movements, Dalit rights movement, to better strategize and implement policies and programs towards the protection of Dalit women's rights. At the international level, examining patterns of violence against Dalit women can contribute towards an enhanced human rights understanding of racial and gender discrimination as interacting factors perpetuating violence against racialized and often marginalized women. I just went through a report by the UN rapporteur on violence against women, Dubravka Simonovic. After her visit to Nepal, she stated there is good constitutional language on violence against women, but on the other hand, there is a huge implementation gap. We must focus on implementation and see how to look into concrete cases and look at how these can be addressed by my mandate and other UN mechanisms. She also said, my suggestion for everyone trying to work to end caste and gender discrimination is to use all the UN mechanisms available to submit cases and concrete examples too. She advocated for a special national action plan to address violence against Dalit women, and it is now important to raise those recommendations with the governments and national actors to see how this can be implemented. And I think this also relates with the Dalit women and girls in India. The need to have desegregated data on several aspects related to Dalit women and girls is imperative. I think we have been demanding it for a long time, and we have put this recommendation at the National Human Rights Institution as well. Exclusivity is the key towards identifying the process towards justice for Dalit women, which includes separate cells with the criminal justice system, including police stations. I think there's a dire need. Courts, there are no separate courts for trial of cases of Dalit women, and also budgetary allocation for their overall development. Support to the Dalit women human rights defenders and Dalit women activists working at the ground level are key strategies. We need to have financial resources for them so that they can continue to do their work on social transformation. We have to set up an international fund for them. This is very crucial. An international study focusing on comparative analysis into the issues of Black women, women from DWD communities, and Dalit women is crucial to identify common areas of intervention to bring social and legal reforms. There is a need to do empirical research on the socio-economic and political status of Dalit women in South Asia, specifically in caste-affected countries. There's a need to develop critical caste theory. I have been stressing it again and again in the lines of critical race theory, and it's very crucial in the caste-affected countries, and in particular in India and Nepal. We need support of the educational institutions and academicians from the Afro-American communities, and also our own Indian friends who are living abroad and are academicians, including Suraj Chengde and Dr. Kevin Brown. A global movement in building a larger network for protecting the rights of Dalit women and girls is inevitable, but also for girls and women from DWD communities, as Paul has been raising these issues from since long time. Now, I would like to end with saying that if human rights are the legitimization of human needs, then the needs of Dalit women for personal security, social economic development, and social justice are key priority areas for intervention, and they want to have a life with dignity and self-respect. And this dignity and self-respect starts from the family, in their own communities, and then goes on to workplaces and public places. Thank you so much. And Jai Bhim.
And thank you, Manjula, and thank you so much for giving us some recommendations to move forward on. Our next speaker was supposed to be Min Vishwakarma, but unfortunately he's in hospital and can't join us. Our next speaker will be Kenya Tyson. And Kenya Tyson, JD, is the Assistant Provost of Academic Affairs and University Curriculum at the New School in New York. Ms. Tyson was National Director of Training and Technical Assistance for Project Safe Neighborhoods, the U.S. Department of Justice's anti-gang initiative, and has consulted on several DOG projects working with jurisdictions across the nation on crime prevention and procedural justice initiatives. She's worked with the International Commission for Dalit Rights, U.S. Department of State, the New Jersey Law and Education Empowerment Project, and the Essex County Prosecutor's Office. She currently serves as an officer of the Garden State Bar Association and was appointed to the New Jersey Supreme Court Advisory Committee on Access and Fairness. Ms. Tyson earned her JD from Delaware Law School, an MS in criminal justice with an emphasis on criminal behavior analysis from the University of Cincinnati, and a BA in political science from Winston-Salem State University. And she'll talk with us about race and criminal justice systems in the US. Go ahead, Kenya, and make sure you unmute yourself.
Okay, thanks, Rick. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay,
Yes,
perfect.
we can hear you.
Great, great. Thank you, thank you. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'd like to thank ICDR for this invitation to discuss the issue of race and criminal justice in the United States, particularly through the lens of system reform. But first, I'd like to thank Waris for pausing to recognize Breonna Taylor and acknowledging the collective sense of grief and injustice that communities of color across the United States, most specifically Black people right now, are experiencing. So thank you for that. I think that as the presentation goes on, you all will see some familiar themes and commonalities related to the ways in which minority populations interact with criminal justice systems globally. That said, I think that most of us, regardless of which end of the globe we are on today, are also in some way, shape, or form familiar with the role that race plays within the criminal justice system in America. To what extent is the question? And so I wanted to just share a few statistics so as to provide a little bit of context for my presentation. A March 2019 study found that Black people were more likely to be subject to traffic stops, and that Black and Latino drivers are more likely to be searched for contraband, even though white drivers are consistently more likely to be found with contraband. Police officers are also more likely to exhibit aggression towards Black people. And of course, there are a number of studies that support this particular claim. But according to data recently released by the Chicago Police Department, Chicago police officers used more force against Black citizens on average than any other race, even though Black citizens tended to exercise less resistance than whites. The rate at which Black Americans are killed by police is twice as high as the rate for white Americans. And according to The Guardian in a 2015 article, racial minorities made up a whopping 62.7% of unarmed people killed by the police in the United States. And as we've seen yet again, just this week with the state of Kentucky's decision not to charge the officers involved in the killing of Breonna Taylor, a law-abiding civil servant who slept in her bed as a defective no-knock warrant was served at her home for someone who was already in police custody. Officers involved in these types of killings are rarely indicted or even convicted for excessive use of force. And despite the election of a Black president in 2008, Black and Latino people continue to be disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system. These two groups alone make up approximately 50% of the incarcerated population, yet only 30% of the US population. And so from fatal police encounters to mass incarceration, I think the thing that is clear is that race still plays a significant role in the execution of justice across the United States. In thinking about the strategies and challenges associated with reforming such a system, I think it's important to reflect upon the origins of this disparity. But first, let me be clear. The data tells us that Blacks and Latinos are disproportionately involved in violent crime in this country. According to the FBI, Blacks account for the majority of gun homicide victims and arrestees, while whites and Latinos in this instance they were all grouped together, account for the majority of non-gun homicide victims and arrestees. However, the Department of Justice also tells us that whites are responsible for the vast majority of crimes that are committed in the United States, with whites dominating crime categories such as larceny and theft, arson, drug abuse violations, and driving under the influence charges, amongst others. And so I'm not suggesting that all interactions are unreasonable or unfounded. I'm simply pointing out a disproportionate heavy-handedness and inequity that persists year after year, decade after decade, and generation after generation. So why is this? Historically, people of color, namely Black, Indigenous, and Latinos, relationship with the criminal justice system in America has been firmly grounded in their identity as other or non-white. So as in the case of the United States, as is the case in Southeast Asia, one might argue that the relationship of Black and Brown people with the justice system is just as much tied to who they are as it is tied to what they do. A recent University of Maryland study supports this point. This study and many others confirm that officers exhibit bias towards Black people, are more likely to make associations between Blacks and weapons, certainly more than they would with whites, and speak less respectfully to Black people during traffic stops and in other settings. But this is nothing new. Race has been criminalized in America since before we became America. In this country, race has been the ultimate status offense. And for those of you who aren't lawyers or not familiar with that term, a status offense in the American jurisprudence system is a non-criminal act that is considered a law violation only because of who the particular offender is. So for instance, indulging in a large glass of wine during our mini-conference might not be a big deal for you or me, but if we were children, that consumption would be a status offense. In other words, a crime, simply because of who we are. And so what I'm suggesting is that white supremacy has been deeply embroidered into the fabric of the American legal system, leaving behind a legacy of government-sanctioned hatred and bigotry, as illustrated by the Indian Removal Act of 1830, both Fugitive Slave Acts of 1793 and 1850, the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1830, Roosevelt's Executive Order 9066, which sent Japanese American citizens to internment camps, all federal legislation that in some way restricted the autonomy and free will of people of color in this country, thereby criminalizing their existence. The criminalization of race was further promulgated through the Black codes and the Jim Crow laws, and cultivated by white lynch mobs responsible for terrorizing Black communities, all while murdering over 4,000 Black citizens between post-slavery Reconstruction and World War II, all without impunity. And the vengeance squads of the 1940s, comprised of white military men and off-duty police officers who attacked Mexican youth in the backdrop of the Zoot Suit riots. Our history of legislative oppression towards people of color, coupled with the underlying conditions associated with socioeconomic inequity, such as poverty, crime, unemployment, and segregation, have effectively created an environment where even race-neutral criminal justice policies and laws continue to have a disparate impact on Blacks and Latinos in the United States. There have been a number of strategies employed in the attempt to reform the American justice system. The entire world has bore witness to the latest wave of protests across the United States in response to yet another round of fatal police encounters. And over the years, we've seen civil disobedience, policy reform, and even new levels of prosecutorial reform and accountability. But until we truly address the systemic racism that underpins the entire justice system, and perhaps find a way to disaggregate racial animus, we will never truly see a change within the American criminal justice system. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenya. Thank you for respecting your time too. And that analysis is so important too. Both what we're dealing with in South Asia and much of the Western world, but particularly relevant to the struggle in the US. Our next speaker will be Vincent Manajahuran, who will be talking to us about race and caste and religion. Let me introduce him. Reverend Dr. Vincent Manoharan is an Indian lawyer and a Dalit theologian, one of the founders of India's national campaign on Dalit human rights and its first general secretary. Reverend Dr. Manoharan undertook national and international advocacy for the rights of Dalits. He heads the National Dalit Christian Watch, a faith-based ecumenical organization which engages with the church to ensure the rights and space of Dalit Christians within the church and its domains. Vincent, go ahead.
Thank you, Rick. I take this opportunity to thank DB, ICDR, for having invited me to speak in this very wonderful, it's not called as webinar, this chat. I'm very much glad to see my own colleagues who have been journeying along with me for more than 20 years, 25 years now. I do not want to mention everybody's name and the fellow panelists, including Manjula. The criminal justice administrative system within India, for me, it is administered by 5 or 6 institutions. To safeguard and protect the people, there is a constitutional safeguard is there. So constitution is one which safeguards. Some criminal laws are there to protect our interests, including Dalits. There are some special legislations are in place to protect Dalits. Here we call this as scheduled caste people. Then there is a whole lot of police department is there. Then comes the judiciary where the lawyers and the judges are there. Then the commissions, National Human Rights Commission, a National SC Commission, National Women Commission, all are dealing with criminal justice administrative system. As my colleagues have already highlighted, where are we? How many are there in all these systems? Forget about the legislations, from police to lawyers to judges or the commissions, where are we? For your information, you could also know that there are 21 high courts are there in India, in which 14 courts are not having even a single Dalit judge. The Supreme Court is having 31 judges. No one is from the Dalit community. I do not want to talk about my own fellow fraternity, legal fraternity lawyers, thousands of lawyers there, but eminently no one is there, except we could call ourselves, we are the eminent lawyers, but we don't have. Let it be on one side. Now I need to share it with you. Where am I? What is my identity? I say that I am a Dalit because I am from an untouchable community. And also I am saying that I'm an anti-caste person, that's why I'm a Dalit. But when I go there to claim myself as a scheduled caste person, the Indian constitution says, no, you are not from the scheduled caste. You are only a Dalit. You can call yourself a Dalit, but you are not a scheduled caste person. My second identity is a Christian. Religiously, I'm a Christian. Where to, I'm a Dalit Christian. So one is a Dalit, the other one is a Dalit Christian. The third one is I'm coming under the minority status within India. So if something happens to me, my dear brothers and sisters, where should I go? As a Dalit, whether I should go? Meaning the scheduled caste person, they will say, no, you are not a scheduled caste. Can I go as a Christian? There they will say, oh, no, you are a Dalit Christian. The third one is, I'm a minority. There too, I am a Dalit Christian minority. I don't think that 8 minutes is sufficient for me to share about the whole thing. But this is a situation that we are undergoing here. Now let me share a few things and I will conclude, because this is a very big issue that we are facing it now. Number one, scheduled caste people, are the Dalits as we call it, the so-called untouchables, are in all the 5 major religions in India. As you are aware, the whole world is having 13 major religions, and India is having 7 to 8 major religions in India, in which 5 are very, very prominent. Hinduism, Sikhism, Buddhism, Islam, and Christianity. Forget about Hinduism, because Hinduism always advocates the Sanatana Dharma, by which it very much says that people are divided and discriminated by birth. That's why I'm not dealing into that. I am going into the other 4 major religions. One is Sikhism, the other one is Buddhism. They are also against casteism. Islam and Christianity, by their doctrines and their practice, by their doctrines and their insights, they are also against casteism. But in all the 4 religions, caste practice is very much there. We will say that the Gurudwaras, we will say, why there is a Ravidas Gurudwara among the Sikh people? Because they are divided. Buddhist, you take it. What do you mean by that neo-Buddhist? Don't say all this that in Mahayana, Hinayana, and from that the new Buddhism comes in. No. In 1956, Baba Sahib Ambedkar embraced from Hinduism to Buddhism, and he has taken more than 3 lakh to 5 lakh of people. From there, they are calling you a neo-Buddhist. Why? Can't I claim myself as a Buddhist? Then coming to Christianity, it's 2000 years old here in India. Why am I called as a Dalit Christian? In Islam is a very one God, Allah. For everyone, God is Allah. He has created the whole thing and all that. That's fine. But why I am called as a Dalit Muslim here? Also, now they are giving another word for is Pasmanda Muslim. Now in Delhi, at the moment in Delhi, we are trying to bring together Dalit Christians and Dalit Muslims, in which I am asking that why are you calling yourself as Pasmanda Muslim? They say Dalit Muslim, and literally above some OBCs are there. They are also like us. So we are calling ourselves as Pasmanda Muslim. So friends, where are we? We also face the same kind of social ostracization. Economically, we are also deprived, and politically, we are powerless. Same thing, what is happening to the Hindu Dalits, Hindu SC caste people, and we are also facing it. But we are not trying, we are not allowed to exercise or to get the benefit from the constitutional framework or from the special legislation or from various other things, because nowhere we can claim that we are coming under that. Even if you go to UN, what happens? Where are we now? Are we to address ourselves with the Committee of Elimination of Racial Discrimination, 3rd committee? Or shall we to go to the Religious Minorities Committee or to the Minorities Issue Committee? We have to go. Where should we go? With what identity we should go? I'm asking Paul always. Paul, my colleague, we are together for so many years. You are going for a DWD issue and a global forum. Kindly take it as. Because he is also a Dalit Christian like me, and he says, okay, you are all with us, you come. When I go to IDS and my own friend is here, Meena. Now I am going to Meena saying that, Meena, please include us because we are Dalit Christians. We are also Dalits. So this is the kind of a situation which is coming in. And for me, the criminal justice administrative system or economic justice or a social justice, all that is not trying to help me out. I need to raise my voice against it. Let me share a bit about what is happening in Christianity, just to share about what is happening within Christianity for the Dalit Christian, then I will stop. Christianity is having around 30 million people in India, in which Dalits are around 21 million, which means 70 to 80% of the people within Christianity are Dalits. But with regard to the bishops here, for example, I am quoting the Roman Catholic Church, the largest church within India as well, like anywhere. Around 184 bishops. We are only 11 bishops. Why so? We are 60 to 70% of the total Christian population, but bishops wise, we are only 11. Why? There are more than 2,500 priests are there. Why your number is very less? There are around 65,000 religious nuns. I am also noticing nuns are sitting here in this. 65,000 nuns, we are not even 1,600 nuns. Why like that? There are cardinals, 4 cardinals from here to Vatican, not even a single cardinal from our side. There are 31 archbishops, not even a single fellow is from the Dalit community. Friends, I think this much only the status of Dalit Christians in India and the Dalit Muslims also. The Muslims, if you go, these are Dalit Muslims, but that is all the institutions or even their own priestly class are in the hands of Sayyids. Sayyids are the people who have come from Middle East, and it's very difficult. Sikhism is also like that. In Buddhism also, our own monks are not there. So the point is, we are very much discriminated, and intercaste marriage within Christians, Dalit Christians and Christians, or Dalit Muslims or even a distant dream, even burial. See, you will say that, oh, we are all buried in the same cemetery. But why cemetery is divided? Visibly, one side you will bury only the non-Dalit Christians, the other side you will bury the Dalit Christians. We will say we are having one single cemetery. I will stop here, my dear friends. The criminal justice administrative system or any justice system in this country, they are not taking us as a kind of human beings minimum to voice our issues, our rights. That's why I am right now. I have been a Dalit human rights defender for long years, nearly 20 years. All my friends are here with you now. I'm seeing their faces. But for the of late, I become the Dalit human rights defender and trying to challenge the church within India. And also I have a contact with Nepal and Sri Lanka, where the situation is also like that. My own friends are saying, you come here, we have to raise this within the Christianity minimum. As a Christian, I cannot go and raise the same thing with the Muslims. They will say, why are you coming and creating problem within the Muslims now? They will say. But within Christianity, I will do that. And I will see to that I will also go along with Paul to all countries. I'm saying why Paul is now going to everywhere to talk about the DWD, where I would also ask, what is my status there, even in the racism. White and black is one. And within the black, anything is there for us? Or within the white, anything is there for among the Christians, what is our status? So we have to raise all this. Thanks for the opportunity and for the patient listening. We will work together. Thank you. Jai Bhim.
Thank you, Vincent. Very, very insightful. We're open for questions, and please put them in the chat. In the meantime, I'd like to start with a question. We've gone over many issues dealing with analyzing caste and race within the criminal justice system. How can we move towards action from this? How can we develop a worldwide community that focuses on integrating caste and race into criminal justice reform activities? And I'd like any of our speakers to try to address that issue.
Can I say?
Go ahead.
I think when we discuss about criminal justice system, for me, I would like to see with the eyes of the person who is at the ground and who has been discriminated and his rights or her rights have been violated. somehow what has happened is that there have been parallel movements which has been happening, and these movements are very important. But somehow I would say that there is a kind of a delink of the ground realities, and also the work of the ground level activist in the context of caste and gender in India or in caste affiliated countries. That's what is my experience. And I would say that somehow their voices are not being heard to a larger extent, because um, within the movements there's a need to create those kind of spaces where we have to have the voices of these people who would be discriminated just not because of one identity of caste and gender, but within the caste and gender there are sub identities. What Vincent said about the religious identities, but we do have subcaste identities within the Dalit communities, and we do have to understand that at the larger level there is lack of representations of Dalit communities from different subcastes, and this is a very serious concern for all of us. And if you see that we have more than 1,000 subcastes of Dalits in India, and how many would have been able to raise their voice or even defend themselves? And when you're talking about women within the communities, I would say that we always come up with these figures of which are from the government, and also the studies which are being taken by the civil society. Somehow we tend to bring up the same facts and figures which have not changed much in decades, and somehow we want to have a positive change. We want to have some change in the lives of these communities. We don't want a rat-eating community in Bihar. What Paul was saying, his own experience, like he wasn't knowing much about Bihar. Even we were not knowing. I was also not knowing. But when you come to know about the reality of your own community people, and when we say that the percentage of literacy of women from Bihar and within Bihar, the Musar, the rat-eating community is just 5-6%. What does that mean? We have been saying this for last 2 decades. The point and the concern is, how are we moving? Where are we moving? How do we strategize? I think that's the most important concern for many of us who work at the ground level, that okay, we do need a lot of changes which happen in the policies, in the laws, and even with the reforms which we are talking about at the United Nations or at various international forums. The key concern is we want ground level change. And I think that's very something I want to raise it again and again. What Vincent was saying, I think I do agree with him, because we did made a film called India Untouched, and where we brought the entire dimension of how caste is interlinked with different religions, whether it's Sikhism, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Hinduism, right? So and Islam. I think these are the true realities which we have to face. And to some extent I would say that not much has been done. I think not much research has also been done when we're talking about the entire aspect of how a religious community from within the Dalit communities, what forms of discrimination do they face, because there is non-recognition of their problems with regard to their own religious identities vis-a-vis the caste and gender. I think there's I can speak a lot on this, but I just want to say there's a high time that we strengthen our own movement in our own countries. Paul has a long-standing experience. Vincent is there. I think what we did in from 1998 till now, we have achieved a lot, and we still have to achieve a lot. And looking at what is the present scenario of India, I think there's a need to re-strategize, reorganize, and relook into our own movement, and look at what are the challenges and what are the strategies, which I spoke about, focusing on caste and gender. But I think we have to look at the larger politics going around in the name of caste, and how do we strategize in terms of addressing this issue at the larger level, where Paul talks about discrimination based on work and descent. And I think we do also have to have parallels with the Black community and also the other communities who face similar forms of discrimination globally. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. Waris, go ahead. You have a comment?
Yeah, Rick, on that question, I think there's twofold for this. How do we impact real change? And I think Manjula is really talking about how do we get actual change to happen, which is the most important thing. Not just talk about it, but in fact make it happen, right? I think two of the things that have to happen, and I think a lot of the speakers today have spoken about this, is that there's so many levels and so many institutions of justice that exist, whether it's a police officer investigating the rape of a Dalit woman, whether it's the judge that's hearing the case, whether it's the lawyer or prosecutor that's trying to prosecute. In India, there's actually an Atrocities Prevention Act, which allows for Dalit lawyers to actually stand in for the prosecutor and to be able to prosecute certain cases that are hate crime based. But again, there isn't proper training, there isn't proper funding, there isn't proper sort of resources dedicated to empower the community to be involved in that system. So I think representation is so important within the community itself. Within the legal community, it has to be a question of representing the community and having them representing themselves at the police level, at the DIG level. And I'm not just talking about the beat cops. I'm talking about the police who make decisions, policies for the police, like DIGs, Inspector General. Those are the level of people that we need to have that are from the community. Lawyers, prosecutors that are involved with prosecution of hate crimes, the defendants, the defense attorneys as well. All of this is the ways you deal with the impunity that everyone's talking about here, that you can commit a crime against a Dalit person, just like you can commit a crime against an African-American person in the United States, and you can get away with it because the system allows for it, because there isn't enough representation in the system by the people who are targeted by the social discrimination, right? So I think that's one thing. And then the second thing that we're finding here is not only that trainings are important to sensitize people, but implicit bias training is so important. I think there's a lot of people who are well-meaning in South Asia who would say, oh, I'm not casteist, I don't believe in the caste system. But if you really scratch beyond the surface, they'll find that they have prejudice. They'll find that they have biases. They'll find that they're approaching Dalits in a certain way that they might not even know this is discriminatory. So I think trainings through bar councils for attorneys, for judges is so important on this specific issue. And then those trainings should be led by lawyers from the Dalit community. And to do that, you have to have lawyers from the Dalit community and empower those. So I think this implicit bias training for non-members of the community who are in the legal field, but also for it to be led and directed by members of the community and empowering them, that's the most important thing. I think this bias is such an important thing that we need to look into. And I think oftentimes we don't, well-meaning people, so to speak, like people who would, on like a question about, do you believe in casteism? They might say no. But then you actually scratch the surface and it's like, do you believe a Dalit lawyer has the right to submit a petition to the Supreme Court? And they might say, oh no, why should they do that? So then it's clear you're biased, you're prejudiced. You need training to understand where you're biased and prejudiced, and then we need to work together to help you overcome that bias. So I think trainings for those non-lawyers on the implicit bias and then representation is both really important. Those are two things I would say.
I would just add, yeah, thank you. I would just underscore your point, Waris, that it's important to have representation, but that training is really important as well. There was a recent report here in the US that there really wasn't a lot of difference between the biases of Black police officers and white police officers. And so it's really kind of been embedded into the training, been embedded into you know, the everyday comings and goings of these officers that are interacting with Black communities. And so it specifically what this study found was that unless that a Black officer was from that particular community, that they demonstrated very similar levels of bias towards Black people at the same levels as whites. And so representation is incredibly important. I am a fan of the affinity bar. But I also think that the training has to be there. I think that implicit bias training is important, but I also think that anti-racism or anti-caste training is important as well. I think that we all want to believe that a lot of the disparities that people face within, you know, these societies are a result of implicit bias, but the reality is that there's still a lot of explicit bias that needs to be addressed as well. And so I think, you know, also looking at that and not assuming that every person that creates a disparate result for a person of color wasn't well-meaning. So I think that looking at both of those and ensuring that the training is there is really important.
Can I add, if I may?
Can I
finish? Can you?
We'll ask Judge Quandra to start, and then Vincent afterwards.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because what Waris has said and what Kenya has said is so very true. When we talk about the biases, the systemic biases, so many of us, I don't mean us necessarily on this call, but people are not fully thinking carefully in terms of their way they prejudge people, the way they have biases. And then when we see the misapplication of the judicial system, then we claim to be so shocked because we say, oh, I don't feel that way. But then when we look a little deeper, we find that so many of us have. So I believe that, yes, that's why, in fact, that was the tone of my keynote address, that we as the leaders, we have this responsibility so that when anybody looks back at what happened today, what we did today, where do we go from here, it will not be said that we did not take our responsibility serious today, and that the implementation follow-up, what comes out of it, will not be taken seriously and for the benefit of everyone. So while we talk about, I'm not saying defund the police, but I'm saying the concept of restructuring the resources that are available, whether they're here in Washington, New York, India, Nepal, anywhere. The restructuring and reutilization and refocus of our resources have to be undertaken so that it's not law and order and that's the end of it. It has to be more law and understanding for the equal implementation, the more just implementation, the more recognized rights of the minority as well as the majority implementation in order to equalize and really come into a classless, casteless society that's not based on race, colorism, or ethnic discrimination. And I'm so delighted to hear Waris speak because I too am a Howard University graduate. And I didn't know that you were from Howard. So I just wanted to throw that out because that was the tone I was seeking to set in my remarks. And I'm delighted to see that we made a circle here and we come back to that. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Judge Quander. Vincent.
Yeah, I will take only 1 minute. See, I go with Dr. Hussein's or Tyson's or Justice Quander's suggestion. And always, even from UN, people are talking about you have to give a proportionate representation to the people. That's fine. And also the training is part of it in order to capacitate them and also to train them not to be, not to become like a discriminated person, something like that. But at the same time, what we are expecting from India, especially Dalit rights activists, we are asking that the erring officials for their willful negligence, they should be punished. There's an act is there, as Hussein was also mentioning this particular act, SAC Prevention of Atrocities Act 1989, now it is amended in 2016. Section 4 clearly says that for any violation or for any kinds of your willful negligence, then these people should be prosecuted. If that is not done, the caste mindset will not go only by training. Training is one area that we need to do. But even at the time of appointment, even at the time of promotions, what plays a great role? Only the caste plays a great role. See, whatever you give the training and all that, I'm not totally negating it. We need it, and some people will be all that. But at the same time, punitive action must be taken against the erring officials who act as castes. Otherwise, it is very difficult in the Indian situation to make these people to understand all are one, that they all may be one, Christ may say, but these people will not accept that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Vincent. We have a question from Dr. Richard, Devados, who's asking whether addressing casteism and racism should begin even before they enter in the criminal justice profession to deal with bias that is inculcated in youth and pervades the society, leading to, in my opinion, a culture of racism and casteism within criminal justice institutions. Could someone address that?
Manjula, yeah. I have my own experiences working with the youth now because since 2017, I am traveling around the country and meeting the youth and youth from different communities and from different religious identities. And that's what motivated me to set up this organization in 2018. Um, as if you, in the context of India, we have more than 50% youth in India, right? It's a huge population, and which is being diverted with all kind. What Richard is raising, I think I fully agree with him, and that's what I decided to do was, I don't want to brainwash their mind, but also trying to, it is a brainwashing in that sense, to make them understand that, and it's not only of the community with where I come from. So it's not only the youth from the Dalit communities, but it's also the youth from the Muslim communities or from the tribal communities. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to bring these communities, the youth from these three communities together on one platform, and which I've already started doing. And I think the experiences have come. So it's one step above what Richard was saying, is how do we groom them up, that when they take some positions of power, where they are not insensitive towards the most marginalized communities in the country. And I think the most important part is education, which one is that the de-learning of what you have learned from your previous institutions, and what you would like to you would like to ingrain it within your own mind and your own understanding about certain communities. And the hatred towards a particular community itself has to be discussed with the youth. And I think there are a lot of opportunities which are available. I do know Surat tried to do with the youth from the African communities who are in India and who face racial discrimination because of the color. I think that's something we need to seriously discuss upon that. But we also have to see how do we bridge the gap between the Bahujan identity. I'm talking about how do we bring the youth from the Muslim, Dalit, tribal identities together, and that will create a kind of a movement which will change the politics of the country. And we want to change that politics. We don't want a right-wing party to control the minds of the youth and also to dominate the entire processes in the country, which is totally against the Indian constitution and also against the values and ethics what we are being trying to teach to the community, and also to learn from the communities. I think there's a lot we can do, much more. We do need people who are like-minded, who have the same understanding and vision, and that would be also a strategy which we can build upon further in our own movements. And I think we have to create those cross boundaries within us, where we have a common platform where we can have knowledge sharing, where we can have platforms where we can have conferences. Now because of COVID, we can also have these kind of conferences where we can involve a lot of youth across the globally, also not only India, but we can do for the DWD communities. So there are a lot of opportunities. It's the will which we need to have, and it's also how do we do the knowledge sharing. I think those are the key aspects which is coming in my mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Manjula. Any other commenters on reaching out to youth to address casteism and racism at an early stage?
I have one brief comment. If you look around the room that we are sharing virtually, you see very little participation by whites from the United States or high caste people from South Asia. And so if we're going to build bridges to the next generation, and we want to have allies in the communities that traditionally hold power over minority communities, it's very important to get allies from the sections of society that are accustomed to having power, and not only to build a really strong network of minority connections, but also to convince people who are from the white community in the United States and the high caste community in South Asia to understand what the issues are and to support those issues.
Great, thanks, Steve. Other comments, questions?
Yeah.
Paul?
May I? Hello?
Paul, go ahead.
Thank you, Rick. one of the things that has always bothered me is we have essentialized identities, and Dalit identities. If you believe it's a social construct, at some point we need to dismantle that. I know I'm very, very delicate and shaky ground, but what is the point when we can dismantle this and break the walls that has created this chasm between Dalit, being Dalit and non-Dalit? How do we really build creative bridges so that in my mind I am free. I'm free from being looked down, or free from hate, free from anger, free from, and I'm really able to liberate myself and not build on things which are continuously perpetuating me to be for generations in a forced identity that has been thrust on me. I never chose to be any identity. So somewhere at some point, I think we have not sufficiently given to this part of, is it really for generations, intergeneration, I'll say, for me also it is descent. So me, my daughters, my all my families, will we continue to be accepting this reality? When can you shatter the walls and bridge this chasm? I think this is something which I feel we need to really begin to give both sides, as Steve was saying, both sides. How long will dominant caste be continuing to allow themselves the privilege of dominant caste and break out from perpetuating these chasms? I think that is something that we'll have to address very consciously, without which I think we will be continuing to at some point have increasing comfort levels of being Dalits.
Great, thank you so much. Kenya.
No, I was just going to say to Stephen's point, I just wanted to note that, I mean, we're here in a really productive environment, and there are, groups and organizations and people doing this work, across the globe. But I think we should be clear that dismantling racism and caste discrimination isn't the responsibility of the people who are victimized by that, but it is the burden of the people who are victimized by that. And so whites and dominant caste people should definitely be at the table for those discussions. But realistically speaking, they should be taking the lead because they created the problem. So that isn't the current reality of what we're dealing with. But ultimately, as we integrate different opinions and different people into this environment, we need to, I think, really understand what the roles and responsibilities of fixing these systemic issues happen to be.
Great, and they need to be forced to look at it. Okay, I saw a hand from Seeker. Do you still want to comment?
And also Manohari Upadhyay, Rick, he has been raising.
Hi, I see Manohari. Go ahead, Manohari.
Yeah. I think, everyone's presentation was very powerful. I personally learned a lot about the whole issue to a certain degree, and I appreciate being part of this. And thank you very much, everyone, for that. The hosts. One point that I would like to make is, having come from wherever I come from, with my background in South Asia, particularly in Nepal, I think we have multi-pronged approach to dealing with the prevailing discrimination arising with caste or race, etc. Like constitutional amendments, and legal reforms, academic work, literature, publication, campaign, etc. But one sector that I think most people seem to have been ignoring is that it is the common people's mind that makes it either things easier for, achieving, a discrimination-free society for the Dalits. And I think the current youths from non-Dalit communities in Nepal are very liberal-minded, generally speaking, from the time of Dr. Ambedkar and Martin Luther King. It's a fertile ground to reach out to work with the community that remains at the helm of affairs in this stratified society. And I think that population, the non-Dalit population, especially the higher caste population in Nepal, is very receptive, I think. And I think we have also, I think we need also to consider reaching out to, primary syllabus, reaching out to educating children to develop a culture that promotes equity in the society. And I think, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Manahari. Boris, you had a comment?
I wanted to speak to Rick.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say I wanted to respond to Paul's really, really worthy comment. I think it's a question we have to keep coming back to. Do we keep the vestige of this awful thing going by continuing to talk about it and being identity-based on that awful thing? Or do we forego it completely in order to completely abandon it and attack it and take it apart? I think that's a really, really interesting question. I think also the underlying question for me is also if we're reimagining or if the new generation is reimagining capitalism, let's just say that, right, in one way, or it's reimagining democracy in another way. Those are the underpinnings, right, as we see, the economic, the social, the cultural underpinnings behind this discrimination. So if we can change that underlying sort of foundation, then maybe we can demonstrably and effectively destroy racism as it sits on top of that foundation. Or the question then becomes, do we attack the thing that's sitting on the foundation, right? Do we attack racism directly in and of itself? So I think there's a question of that. Do we attack the underlying or do we attack over? So like, for example, Bernie Sanders talks about economic justice, economic reform as a means to achieve racial justice, right? But he's doing it in this other way, whereas other folks are like, no, the first point of conversation has to be the racism itself, the identity itself, and then we can break down capitalism as it exists as an exploitative structure or whatever else we want to talk about, justice systems. I think I don't have an answer to this. I just think of it in that way of like, are we attacking the foundations or are we attacking the things sitting on the foundations, which racism is? And I think Paul's point is absolutely right there. I mean, we have to keep coming back to this question of, are we holding this thing up, right, by not attacking it directly, or are we holding it up by not attacking the foundations of it directly, which is capitalism, which is the justice system, which is economics, social, cultural, like I mentioned. So I think Paul really brings up a valid point, which all of us should be considering continually and going back to our thoughts on this. So I just want to mention that.
So
excellent. Okay, well, go ahead.
Rick, just to say that it need not be either or, no? We need to, from all sides, I think we need to just destroy it, wherever, it raises its head or tail or whatever, I think you're right. We need not look at only superstructure from that earlier Marxian style, but I think address it economically from institutions of criminal justice, from ensuring there is gender justice, all those aspects I think will have to crumble one day. I hope it is too soon than later.
Agreed.
So I'm sorry that we don't have time for more questions. But just to sum up, I think that it's clear that dialogues like this are extremely important for us to take a gender and religion, caste, and race lens to looking at justice issues, to analyzing the problems of our justice systems in our individual countries, looking at best practices, recognizing that there can be some lessons learned, but that to attack justice reform without looking at caste or race or gender or religion is not to do justice reform adequately. And that even more than that, we have to look at the whole basis of our governments, our commitments to democracy, the effects of the capitalist system, of racial capitalism on us. And so this has been a very good effort as a start to that. ICDR is hopeful that we'll continue to have such a dialogue in our next in-person conference. And I'm going to turn things over to DB to talk about next steps and this conference overall. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rick. Rick has been an instrumental leader for the ICDR, not only just leading in terms of the operational level, but also enhancing the knowledge of the ICDR within the, the organizational community and beyond. So thank you for that, for leading the ICDR and moderating today's the panel. The discussion was very in-depth, very insight, and very urgent as well. Let me begin with thanking each of you. That include our keynote speaker, Rahul Amin Kwandra, who have been with us, and he's a great resources for us moving ahead in terms of justice reform campaign or the integrating the Dalit and racial justice movement together. Likewise, Dr. Purvi Mehta and Rick, as I said, they are very much instrumental on their respective field and then the movement of Dalit rights and social justice. I would like to equally appreciate and thank the Dr. Kevin Brown. He has been with us and he has been instrumental on this movement. Dr. Steve Fulmer, he's been with us and then leading this movement from the grassroots level to the academia. So he has been working in the very grassroots level in Nepal, in a very remote area, and then bringing those, ingredients into and integrate in the academia. Likewise, the Shuras, you've been a champion to integrate and advocate this movement. As Kwanda showed your book, I just received your book. I'm going to finish, start reading from the next. Like the Paul Diwakar, we have been working with all time and champion to globalizing and reforming this, the Dalit right movement or this movement under the umbrella of caste, work, and dissent. Waris Hussain, there is no word what you said, and then I see your passion and the dedication, and we have been chatting and we have been planning to the next move. As many of us and many of the speakers said that we need a knowledge sharing and the training, and then the somehow the positive bias orientation in the judiciary system. And then I'm sure we are going to start in the next level after releasing this, the research project. So we are not just having a conversation, but also we are equally taking accountable ourselves and making ourselves accountable to move ahead, how we can save a life of, or how we can ensure the justice for the Breonna Taylor or the Samjana BK just killed a 12-year-old girl, or the Suraj Harijan in the Bihar. So they are the, as I gave you, the 1,500 cases of the caste-based atrocities, and then 123 cases in the United States racial injustice. It's a huge, a life have been gone. Life have been killing. So it is our responsibility to moving ahead. Likewise, Kenya, you are been a champion to working on this issue and bridging the gap between the racial justice and Dalit right movement, and bringing this effort to, sharing the knowledge and then the providing your expertise. I really appreciate. Manjula, you and I've been met almost, I think, the 25 years, and you are still, the eager to provide the justice, secure the, ensure the justice, and empower the youth community. Vincent, as you said, yes, we have to look into the difference dynamic, and then the look into the encourage, establish and re-engineer our identity within the the own society where we belong to, and the entire and then the integrate in the wider society. So all of us have been working and have a additional accountability to re-engineering our society. We are talking about the re-engineering. We need to reform the nation and society, and reform the justice system, and that is we can do if we think in a how we can impact in a personal life of our community. And moving ahead, this is just the beginning. I think we are going to start every 2 months at the follow-up. We set up the 6 different, broader theme for the global conference, and this is the one of the theme. Moving ahead, we will be doing 2 things. One is bringing you back in a task force to work on the reforming justice system, how we can provide the better training, how we can provide share the better knowledge to our professional legal communities, and then the social engineers beyond the legal communities, and also how we can ensure, ultimate goal is how we can ensure the justice for the victims. We would like to provide the justice. We cannot just talk. We cannot just blind just hearing and receiving information. We need to act immediately. So that would be our next goal. We do have a ongoing research on the issue of the impact or influence of the caste in the election and politics. That's another major the element of the social re-engineering process. So we'll be coming up with that to have another level of discussion looking into the politics and election by the end of this year. But inside that, I would like to appreciate each of you, your in-depth the sharing knowledge and commitment. I will not just think that you are just speaking, but you are also committing yourself to ensure the justice for everyone. And I also would like to thank my team, especially Jamie Lee, Program Officer, Krishna Vishwakarma, IT Coordinator, and Jen Lung Wang, the Content Analyst. These are the people who have been working very hard to arrange this conference. I would like, along with all the panelists, speaker, and participants, let's clap each of you, and thank you for participating. Thank you for your effort, and let's be in touch so that we shall overcome. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Pleasure meeting you all. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you. Save him.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.